containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece, and Africa as the birthplace.
Imagine finding out that the foundational text of Western civilization isn't actually a metaphor for enlightenment, but like a literal ancient warning about a cosmic hostage situation.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. Like imagine that for over 2,000 years, every university, every philosophy professor, every textbook has just been reading it completely wrong. And they've been blinding you to the fact that you are living in a simulated reality run by these malicious entities.
It's quite the hook.
It really is. So today we are testing this viral theory that claims Plato's allegory of the cave is actually the original ancient blueprint for the Matrix.
I mean, it is an incredibly seductive idea, isn't it?
Totally.
It takes something that's usually seen as, dusty, academic, classical Greek philosophy and just turns it into this high-stakes thriller where the major world religions are exposed as literal tools of enslavement.
Seductive is the perfect word for it. So, welcome to the deep dive. We have a highly specific, very ambitious mission for you today. This isn't going to be like a casual overview.
No, definitely not.
We are going to conduct a rigorous forensic audit of a viral argument making the rounds right now. Our target is a popular video featuring the philosopher Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani. It's on the Gnostic Informant channel, in case you want to look it up.
And if you haven't seen it, Jorjani makes some really explosive claims about Plato in this.
Very explosive. He argues that the entities in Plato's cave aren't metaphors, but literal archons. These, malevolent spiritual governors holding humanity hostage.
Right. And he argues that this entire idea came directly from Persia. And then he uses this framework to attack the Abrahamic religions as these deliberate demonic con jobs.
Yeah, it's intense. And because Jorjani is a trained philosopher, he doesn't just, ran into a camera.
No, he's very articulate. He weaves together genuine historical data points with these massive, and I mean massive leaps of speculative logic.
Right.
He just effortlessly jumps from the trial of Socrates to Zoroastrian dualism and then right into late antique Gnostic paranoia. So it requires a very sharp scalpel to sort of separate the historical facts from the retroactive theorizing.
Which is exactly why we brought an entire surgical kit today. We're going to test Jorjani's thesis using a very specific set of lenses.
Yes, the heavy hitters.
We are bringing in the groundbreaking, intricately detailed, and frankly, often debated works of the 19th century Egyptologist Gerald Massey. Specifically, we're looking at his massive volumes like Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World.
A phenomenal resource.
And we are also utilizing George G.M. James's Stolen Legacy, Martin Bernal's Black Athena, and insights from Walter Williams.
And these texts, they basically serve as our historical lie detectors today. They represent a major historiographical intervention.
Yeah, they force us to look at the Afroasiatic and Egyptian roots of Western thought. Roots that, as we're going to see, completely change how we read Plato.
And they completely dismantle Jorjani's reliance on Persian origins, too.
Right. Now, if you are listening to this and wondering if we're just like swapping one controversial theory for another, let's be perfectly clear about the ground rules for this audit. We are mapping an ideological battlefield here.
Exactly. We are not here to validate Jorjani's highly charged views on world religions.
Not at all.
Nor are we treating Massey, James, or Bernal as these unquestioned deities of history.
Right, because they have their critics too. So where these revisionist scholars illuminate genuine patterns of transmission, we will absolutely use them.
But where they rely on weak analogies, we will call that up just as quickly.
Exactly. The goal is to figure out what Plato actually meant, where his ideas actually came from, and whether Jorjani is clarifying the evidence or if he's just projecting a modern sci-fi fantasy onto the ancient world.
It really is a stress test of how we interpret history.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's step right into the cave. Jorjani's entire argument hinges on a radical rereading of Plato's Republic, specifically Book 7.
Right.
So for the listener who maybe hasn't read it since college, the standard interpretation is that you have these prisoners chained in a cave facing a wall. Behind them is a fire.
A big fire, yeah.
And between the fire and the prisoners, there are people walking along this raised walkway, and they're holding up physical objects, like statues of animals, trees, things like that.
And the prisoners can only see the shadows of those objects cast on the wall in front of them.
Right, and because they've been chained their whole lives, they think the shadows are reality.
Exactly, and the traditional reading of this is that it's an allegory for education and epistemology.
Just how we learn and perceive things.
Yes. The cave is the physical, material world we see with our eyes. The shadows are our flawed sensory perceptions.
Because our senses can fool us.
Exactly. And the philosopher is the one who breaks the chains, turns around, sees the fire, and eventually crawls all the way out of the cave into the actual sunlight.
Which represents what? True knowledge? The forms.
Yes, true knowledge, the forms, the ultimate reality of things.
But Jorjani looks at this text and says, well, no, you're all missing the most important part.
He completely reframes it.
He points to the people walking on the raised walkway, the ones holding the props, and he asks, who are they?
Right.
Because, according to Jorjani, these aren't just metaphorical stand-ins for ignorance or political manipulators. He claims Plato is literally describing archons.
And to understand what an archon is, we actually have to fast forward several hundred years after Plato. We have to look at the Gnostic movements of the first few centuries of the Common Era.
Okay, so a massive time jump.
A huge time jump. So the word archon literally means ruler or magistrate in Greek. But in Gnostic cosmology, the archons are these malevolent, demonic entities.
Like cosmic wardens.
Exactly. They are the builders of the physical universe, which the Gnostics firmly believed was a flawed, evil prison.
And the purpose of the prison is what?
It's designed to trap divine sparks, which are human souls in matter. They want to keep us trapped in physical bodies.
So if these demonic archons are the ones running the projector in Plato's cave, what is the movie they are showing us? Like, what are the shadows in his theory?
Well, according to Jorjani, the movie is conventional religion and societal control. He explicitly argues that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are the shadow plays.
Wow. Okay, so he's not holding back.
Not at all. He frames figures like Moses not as genuine prophets, but as mechanisms of this giant cosmic con job.
A con job run by archons.
Yes, because the goal of these scriptural religions, in Jorjani's view, is to keep humanity trapped in a state of pistis.
Pistis. What does that mean?
It's the Greek word for faith or blind belief. And the archons want us in pistis so that we never achieve gnosis.
Which is the namesake of Gnosticism.
Exactly. Gnosis is direct, experiential, liberating knowledge, knowing the ultimate truth that frees you from the prison.
I have to say, I am struggling with this leap because it is just so relentlessly cinematic.
It really is.
I mean, it is literally the plot of The Matrix. The archons are the machines, the physical world is the code, the major religions are the blue pills keeping everyone docile, and the Gnostic philosophers are Neo.
Waking up to the horrible truth.
Yes, waking up in the pod. It makes for an incredible story. But my question is Jorjani actually revealing a hidden truth about 4th century BCE Athens? Or is he taking a much later, incredibly paranoid Gnostic theology and just pasting it backwards onto Plato?
It is precisely the latter. I mean, Jorjani is committing a massive foundational category error here.
Okay, break that down for me.
He is taking syncretic, late antique paranoia and retrofitting it onto classical epistemology. So the Gnostics, they were basically a theological blender.
A blender, right, mixing things up.
Yes. They mix elements of Greek philosophy, Jewish mysticism, and early Christianity into this highly rebellious, deeply pessimistic worldview.
Because they were living under the Roman Empire, which wasn't exactly a great time for a lot of marginalized groups.
Exactly. So they certainly read Plato, but they read him through the lens of their own trauma and alienation.
Okay, so they read Plato and said, aha, this cave allegory perfectly describes the evil prison we live in right now.
Yes. They literalized the metaphor to fit their own theology. But that doesn't mean that's what Plato originally intended centuries earlier.
Right. But Jorjani doesn't stop there. He needs a source code for this matrix. If Plato didn't just invent this out of thin air, Jorjani has to explain where he got the idea of a deceptive physical world versus a pure spiritual reality, right?
Yes, and this is where Jorjani makes a major geographic shift. He plants his flag firmly in the Persian Empire.
Okay, so we're leaving Greece.
We're leaving Greece and heading east. He argues that this entire framework, the deceptive matrix and the liberating hidden truth, comes from Zoroastrianism.
Interesting. What's his evidence for that?
Well, he relies heavily on biographical anecdotes. He points out that Pythagoras allegedly spent 12 years studying with the Magi in Persia.
The Zoroastrian priests.
Right, and he notes that Heraclitus was invited by Darius the Great to be a court philosopher. So he uses these connections to argue that the true intellectual matrix of Platonic thought is deeply, fundamentally Persian.
And where does Zarathustra fit into this? Because he's the founder of Zoroastrianism.
Jorjani claims that Zarathustra was this ultimate counter-traditional rebel who inverted human religion.
Inverted it how?
Zarathustra supposedly looked at the traditional gods that people were worshiping at the time and declared, these aren't gods, these are manipulative sadists, these are the archons.
So Jorjani is building this very neat, very linear timeline. Zarathustra invents the idea of evil matrix lords in Persia. He teaches this to the Magi teach it to Pythagoras. Pythagoras influences Plato. Plato writes the cave allegory, and then the Gnostics finally figure it all out hundreds of years later.
It is an incredibly neat timeline. It flows perfectly. Yeah. But the only problem is that to make it work, you have to completely ignore the actual documented historical origins of Greek philosophy. You basically have to erase the entire continent of Africa from the intellectual history of the Mediterranean.
Wow. And this is where our audit really begins. Because if we're going to figure out what the shadows in Plato's cave actually were, we have to leave the Persian Empire. We have to go to the Nile Valley.
Yes, we do.
So let's pull George G.M. James's Stolen Legacy off the shelf.
Now, James's work is a fascinating and really disruptive intervention in classical studies. His core thesis is that the term Greek philosophy is actually a misnomer.
A misnomer?
Yes. He argues that the philosophical systems we attribute to the Greeks were actually the teachings of the Egyptian mystery system, which were imported into Greece.
Now, we need to be intellectually honest here with the listener. Mainstream scholarship has vigorously debated James since the book was published back in, 1954?
Yes, 1954.
Right. Some critics point out that he sometimes overextends linguistic connections, or that he treats the Egyptian mystery system as this monolithic university, which, might be an oversimplification of how it actually worked.
And that is a completely fair critique. James sometimes writes with the zeal of a prosecutor building a case.
Yeah, he's very definitive.
But his central premise, that the pre-Socratic philosophers and Plato himself drew the core architecture of their thought directly from Egypt, is vital. And it's actually increasingly supported by a modern historical analysis.
So let's trace the actual transmission here, because Jorjani is so focused on Pythagoras hanging out with the Magi in Persia. Where does James say these Greek thinkers were actually going?
James points directly to Ionia.
Which is where?
Ionia was a region on the western coast of Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. But in antiquity, it was this massive, thriving cultural melting pot. And it was heavily, heavily influenced by Egyptian and Phoenician trade networks.
It wasn't just this isolated Greek bubble.
Not at all. So thinkers like Thales, Anaximander, Pythagoras, these intellectual ancestors of Plato, they didn't just wander out into the Persian desert to find wisdom. They were deeply embedded in these Ionian networks that had direct pipelines to the Egyptian priesthood.
Ah, so they had a direct line to the source.
Yes. James meticulously documents how Greek intellectuals traveled to centers like Heliopolis and Memphis, and they went there to undergo initiation and study mathematics, astronomy, and theology directly from the Egyptians.
Okay, so let's apply this directly to the cave allegory. The cave is Plato's way of explaining his theory of ideas, or the theory of forms, right?
Yes.
Wait, before we move on, let's just translate this into plain English, because words like noumena and phenomena get thrown around a lot in these philosophical discussions.
Please do. It gets very dense very fast.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, we are basically talking about the hidden blueprint of reality versus the physical building we can actually touch.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, so the blueprint, the perfect, unchanging mathematical concept of a thing, is the noumena. And the physical building, which has flaws, which decays over time, which is made of crude matter, is the phenomena. So Plato is saying the physical world is just a decaying, imperfect copy of the perfect blueprint.
That is an excellent analogy. The blueprint is the form, and the building is the shadow on the cave wall.
Okay, so where does James say Plato got this idea of a split reality if it wasn't from Persia?
James argues that this principle of opposites, this contrast between being and not being, the real and the unreal, the permanent and the transitory, it was not an original Greek invention.
Right.
And it most certainly was not a Persian political rebellion against these demonic archons. It was the foundational cosmological principle of the Egyptian mystery system.
But how do the Egyptians teach this? Because they didn't write philosophical treatises like Plato did, right?
Right.
We don't have Egyptian dialogues.
No, they didn't write dialogues. They taught it through architecture, through myth, and through ritual.
Ritual architecture.
Yes. The Egyptian system was built on a doctrine of duality that ultimately resolved into unity. And you see it everywhere in their world once you know to look for it.
Give me some examples.
You see it in the pairs of male and female deities like Osiris and Isis, representing the active and passive forces of nature. You see it structurally in the twin pillars that were erected at the entrances of their temple.
Oh, the pillars.
Right, so the initiate walking between those twin pillars was physically, ritually enacting the journey between the opposites, between light and dark, truth and illusion, in order to reach the unified sacred sanctuary inside.
Wow. So when Plato writes the allegory of the cave, he isn't describing a hostage situation at all.
Not even slightly.
He is taking the Egyptian architectural and ritualistic doctrine of opposites and just translating into a Greek literary format.
Exactly, he's Greekifying it.
So the shadows on the wall aren't a malicious con job perpetrated by demonic overlords holding up fake props. The shadows are just the natural, inevitable limitations of the physical world. It's an epistemological model. It's about how the human brain processes reality, not a cosmic conspiracy.
Precisely. Jorjani has taken an epistemological allegory that is deeply rooted in Egyptian esoteric science, and he has literalized it into a demonic sci-fi thriller.
But I want to push back for a second on behalf of the listener who was tracking Jorjani's logic, because Jorjani makes a very specific historical point. He claims that Plato and Socrates were pushing back against conventional Greek religion because they understood it was promulgated by these archons to keep people ignorant. And historically, we know Socrates actually was put on trial and executed by the Athenian state, right?
It was, yes.
And the charge was literally about the gods. So if Socrates is executed for challenging the gods, couldn't Jorjani just argue that the Athenian gods were the archons that Socrates was trying to expose? Like, how do we know for a fact this was about importing Egypt and not a rebellion against a matrix?
That is the exact friction point Jorjani exploits, and it's a very clever rhetorical move.
Right, because it sounds plausible.
It does. He correctly identifies a massive tension between Socrates and traditional Greek religion, but he entirely misidentifies both the source and the nature of that tension. Let's look at the actual indictment against Socrates.
Okay, let's look at the receipts.
He was charged with asebe, which translates to impiety. Specifically, he was charged with failing to acknowledge the gods that the city acknowledges and for introducing new, quote, strange divinities.
Strange divinities. So what were these strange divinities if they weren't the Persian truths about the archons?
Well, Jorjani would have you believe they were the Persian teachings, but James argues, quite compellingly when you look at the historical context, that the new ideas Socrates was introducing were actually the unwritten esoteric teachings of the Egyptian mysteries.
Wait, explain that dynamic. Why would the Athenian government care so much if Socrates was teaching Egyptian philosophy? Why execute him for that?
Because the Athenian state religion was civic. It was inherently tied to the identity, the politics, and the laws of the city-state.
So to question the gods is to question the state.
Exactly. The Egyptian mystery system, on the other hand, was an initiation-based, secretive, elite epistemology that fundamentally questioned the ultimate reality of the physical world, and that included the physical city of Athens and its civic gods.
Oh, I see.
Socrates was gathering the youth of Athens and teaching them to question the foundational reality of their own society using imported foreign intellectual tools. The Athenian government didn't execute him for exposing a cosmic conspiracy of archons.
They executed him because he was a political threat.
Yes. They executed him for importing an esoteric epistemology that threatened local political and religious authority.
That is a massive distinction. Jorjani sees this cosmic rebellion against a matrix. But the historical record actually just shows a localized, intense clash over the importation of Egyptian esoteric science.
It was a threat to state security, frankly, not a revelation of a simulated universe.
Okay, so if the shadows in Plato's cave were just philosophical limits and not evil monsters, it leaves a giant hole in Jorjani's theory.
It does.
Because where did the Gnostics get the idea of these cosmic dictators in the first place? They didn't just invent them out of thin air, right? They really believed in these monstrous evil forces trying to destroy humanity. So to find the real origin of these monsters, we have to look at how ancient humans talked about the weather.
Yes. And that transition takes us directly to the most powerful tool in our audit today. We're bringing in Gerald Massey and his concept of the disease of language.
We are opening up Massey's Ancient Egypt, the light of the world. And honestly, His methodology here is a complete paradigm shift for how we look at mythology.
It really changes everything.
If you are listening to this, I want you to forget everything you learned about Greek mythology in high school. We are doing a forensic audit of the origin of the monster itself.
Massey forces us to abandon a very persistent, deeply ingrained modern assumption.
Which is what?
The assumption, which is held by many modern metaphysicians, philosophers like Jorjani and even early anthropologists, is that early humanity looked out at nature and projected human personalities onto it.
Right. The idea that primitive humans saw the sun and thought, oh, that's a powerful man driving a fiery chariot. Or they felt the wind and thought, that's an invisible guy blowing air out of his mouth. We just naturally assume they always created gods in their own human image.
And Massey systematically destroys that assumption.
How so?
He argues that early primitive man was far too beggarly, far too powerless in the face of the overwhelming, terrifying forces of external nature to ever dream of imposing his own relatively weak human image onto them.
I mean, that makes sense. It's a kind of modern arrogance to think early humans were that confident, right?
Exactly. When you are at the mercy of the elements, you don't think you look like the storm. Instead of anthropomorphizing, giving things human form, they used what Massey calls zootypes.
Zootypes. Let's unpack that because it's a crucial concept. I want to try an analogy here. Zootypes sound to me a lot like ancient emojis.
Oh, that's an interesting way to frame it.
Right, like if I send you a text message with a fire emoji, I don't need literal combustion. I don't mean my phone is actually on fire.
Right, you mean something is cool or intense.
Exactly. I'm using an image of a physical thing to represent an abstract force or feeling. But imagine if, thousands of years from now, some future civilization digs up my text messages, sees the fire emoji, and concludes that I was a literal arsonist worshipping a fire demon.
Yes.
Is that basically what a zootype is?
That is a brilliant analogy. That is exactly the mechanism Massey is describing. Early humans apprehended nature through its effects. They couldn't explain the meteorological mechanics of the wind, but they intimately understood the concept of force.
Because they felt it.
Right. So they used the lion to represent the panting, destructive power of the wind. They used the crocodile to represent the hidden soul of life moving in the water. The hippopotamus, the jackal, the hawk, these weren't just animals. They randomly decided to worship as gods.
They were emojis.
They were a primitive sign language. They were ideographs representing superhuman natural powers.
Massey has this fantastic, really simple anecdote in his book that brings this to life perfectly. He talks about a young boy from London who goes to the seaside for the very first time.
I love this example.
The boy looks out at the crashing waves, he turns to his mother and he asks, "Who is chucking them heaps of water about?"
It is a perfect illustration of the modern mindset.
Right. The boy naturally assumes there is a who-like, a person, an intelligence, a mastermind behind the natural force. And Massey says that's exactly what modern scholars assume early man did.
But then Massey compares the boy to his cat.
Yes. He says he put a mirror in front of his cat. The cat saw the reflection, was startled, but instead of just reacting to the visual image and assuming it was a ghost cat or something magical, the cat went up and smelled the mirror.
It used its other senses to test reality.
Exactly. It realized there was no actual cat there, no physical smell, and it just walked away.
The cat didn't conjure up a phantom mastermind. It just accepted the natural physical fact.
Yes. Massey is saying early man was like the cat, not the boy. They were practical, terrified observers of physical nature, not these non-verifying visionaries inventing human masterminds behind the weather.
And this makes me realize something about Jorjani.
What's that?
Jorjani's the boy at the beach.
Oh, wow! Yes, he is! He is looking at ancient symbolic representations of nature, this primitive emoji sign language. And he's taking them literally as evil, human-like, manipulative masterminds.
You have hit the absolute core of the issue right there. Let's trace the specific origin of Jorjani's archon using Massey's framework to prove this.
Okay, let's trace it.
In the African and Egyptian systems, long before there were human-shaped gods, the concept of a massive, overwhelming, dark entity originated as a zootype. Specifically, the Egyptian updragon, which actually has roots in the even older African figure of the Zimwi.
The giant water reptile.
Yes, the giant water reptile. Apap was depicted as this enormous coiled serpent. But here is the crucial distinction that dismantles Jorjani's entire thesis.
Okay, what is it?
Apap was not a literal evil spiritual governor. Apap was not a conscious entity plotting the enslavement of human souls. Apap was a pre-anthropomorphic representation of natural negation.
Natural negation. Explain the mechanism of that.
It is the absence of what keeps you alive. Drought, darkness, The eclipse. It was the monster that swallowed the light of the sun at dusk, or the beast that withheld the life-giving inundation of the Nile during a dry season.
It's the physical absence of life.
Exactly. So when the Egyptian myth says that Horus, or Ra, pierces the Apap dragon in the eye with a spear, they were not describing a historical cosmic battle against a demonic archon.
Wow.
It was a cosmological representation of the dawn breaking the darkness or the sun ending a drought. It was purely sign language. It's the fire emoji.
So how on earth did we get from a symbolic representation of a drought to a Gnostic demon running a simulated matrix?
Through what Massey calls the disease of language, which is effectively a catastrophic loss of translation.
Like playing a game of telephone across thousands of years.
Precisely. When the Greeks, and later the Gnostics, inherited these Egyptian myths, they were entirely disconnected from the original environment and the original sign language. They didn't understand the zootypes, they didn't know how to read the emojis.
So they literalized them.
Exactly, they humanized them. The giant water reptile that originally represented the physical lack of rain became a literal giant, a magnified, non-natural ogre with a malicious, evil will.
And it just kept evolving.
Right, and eventually, by the time we reached the highly syncretic, politically traumatized theology of Gnosticism in the 1st and 2nd centuries, that ogre is transformed into a demonic archon, an evil architect of the physical world.
That is wild. So Jorjani's entire thesis, that these texts reveal actual malevolent entities running a shadow, play rests on a fundamental historical degradation of Egyptian nature myths.
Yes.
He is reading the mistranslation as the original truth. He thinks he's decoding the Matrix, but he is actually just misunderstanding a weather report from 4000 BCE.
That is the ultimate tragedy of his analysis. The Gnostics took symbols of natural phenomena and turned them into theological monsters. And Jorjani is taking those theological monsters and projecting them backward onto Plato, completely bypassing the actual origin of the concepts.
If you're listening right now, you might be thinking, wait, how could a PhD philosopher just ignore all of this Egyptian history? Like, why does Jorjani place all his chips on Persia?
It's a very valid question.
Why does he insist that this dualism and this concept of a matrix came from Zarathustra and the Magi, while completely ignoring this massive, older Afroasiatic origin?
Well, to understand why a modern scholar might instinctively bypass Egypt entirely in favor of Persia, we have to look at the sociology and the historiography of classical studies itself.
The history of how we study history.
Exactly. We have to test Jorjani's Persian claim against Martin Bernal's monumental work, Black Athena.
Right. Because Jorjani says Plato's thought is essentially Persian. He leans heavily on the idea of Pythagoras studying with the Magi and Heraclitus hanging out with Darius. Bernal gives us a framework to understand why that specific narrative is so appealing to modern Western thinkers and how it was systematically constructed.
Yes, he does. Bernal outlines two completely distinct ways that scholars have viewed the origins of ancient Greece over the centuries. He calls them the ancient model and the Aryan model.
Okay, let's start with the ancient model. This is what the Greeks themselves actually believed about their own origins.
Right, exactly. If you go back and read the primary sources, Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, the ancient Greeks freely and repeatedly admitted their immense cultural, religious, and philosophical debt to Egypt and Phoenicia.
They weren't hiding it.
No, Herodotus explicitly states that the names of nearly all the gods came to Greece from Egypt. They viewed the Nile Valley as the fountainhead of immense ancient wisdom. This wasn't controversial to them. This was the conventional wisdom for over 2,000 years.
So what happened? How did we lose the ancient model?
It changed dramatically at a very specific point in history. Bernal argues that a new model was fabricated, the Aryan model, and it picked up incredible momentum starting around the year 1785.
Wait, why 1785? What was the mechanism driving this shift? Why did they suddenly need a new model?
It was the convergence of several massive intellectual and political movements in Europe at the time. First, you have the Enlightenment and the rise of progressivist epistemology.
Which means what exactly?
The idea that humanity is constantly moving upward from dark ignorance to bright rationality. Second, you have the romanticizing of ancient Greece. European intellectuals began to view Greece as the immaculate, hyper-rational childhood of Europe.
Like this pure, untainted wellspring of logic.
Right. And third, crucially, you have the development of systematic pseudo-scientific racist ideology, which was needed to justify the transatlantic slave trade and European colonialism.
Oh, wow. So they have this massive cognitive dissonance going on.
Exactly. The European scholars of the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly those centered in places like the University of Göttingen in Germany, absolutely revered Greek civilization. But their developing racial ideologies could no longer tolerate the idea that this glorious, rational, pure European civilization was deeply indebted to Africa and the Semitic world.
It literally broke their world.
It broke it entirely.
They couldn't stomach the ancient model anymore. So how did they manage to decouple Greece from Egypt? Like, academically?
They essentially rewrote the history of cultural transmission, and they created the discipline of modern philology, tracing language roots. And to explain Greek brilliance without giving credit to Africa, they looked north and east.
To where?
They attributed Greek genius to Indo-European or Aryan invasions and influences. They looked to India and they looked to Persia.
This is a critical point for our audit today. Because if we look at Jorjani's argument, he is operating perfectly within this 19th century historiographical framework.
He is a textbook example of it.
He's utilizing the Aryan model.
Completely. Jorjani's heavy, almost exclusive emphasis on Iran and Persia aligns flawlessly with the project of decoupling Greek philosophy from its Afroasiatic roots. Now, to be fair to the historical record, Persian influence on Greece absolutely existed.
Sure, they were neighbors.
Right. They were neighboring empires, they fought massive wars, they traded, there was undoubtedly a cross-pollination of ideas.
Let me interject here to make sure we clarify something for the listener, just to keep things balanced. Bernal's Black Athena is one of the most fiercely debated books in classical studies.
Oh, fiercely debated.
Mainstream scholarship has pushed back very hard on some of his work, arguing that he sometimes relies on weak linguistic analogies, or that he overstates the extent of direct Egyptian colonization of Greece. We are not saying Bernal is flawless, or that every single etymology he proposes is correct.
A vital point. We must treat Bernal and James as historical interventions, not as infallible scripture.
But their core intervention, the exposure of this systemic bias that aggressively tried to erase Egypt's influence on Greece, is absolutely undeniable.
Completely undeniable.
Even if Bernal is wrong on a specific linguistic detail, the broad stroke is true. 19th century scholars actively suppressed the Egyptian connection because of political and racial ideologies. And by ignoring the Nile Valley entirely in favor of the Persian Empire, Jorjani commits a massive historical omission.
He really does.
He is using Persian influence not just as a contributing factor, but as a mechanism to bypass the older foundational roofs of Greek thought.
He is treating the Persian influence as the absolute genesis of these ideas, rather than a later influence on a Greek intellectual culture that was already profoundly shaped by millennia of Egyptian thought.
It's like trying to explain the invention of the automobile by only looking at a Ford factory in 1950 while completely ignoring the invention of the wheel.
That is exactly what it's like.
Okay, I follow that. But let's give Jorjani a chance to defend his specific claim regarding Zarathustra.
All right, let's look at Zarathustra.
Even if he's ignoring Egypt, could he be right about Zarathustra's specific contribution to human thought? Because Jorjani claims Zarathustra was this incredible counter-traditional thinker who looked at the old gods, realized they were sadists, and essentially invented the concept of dualism, good versus evil. Jorjani claims this was the moment humanity woke up.
To test that specific claim, we have to go back to Gerald Massey, and we also need to bring in the insights of Walter Williams. We need to systematically dismantle the idea that Zarathustra actually invented dualism, or that dualism originated as some kind of political rebellion.
Let's do the forensic work. Did Zarathustra invent the idea of good fighting evil?
According to Massey and Williams, absolutely not.
Not at all.
No. The eternal contest between light and darkness, which is the foundational bedrock basis of all dualistic thought, is inherently African, and it predates the rise of Persia and Zoroastrianism by thousands of years.
Okay, give me the receipts. What are the specific examples from the older traditions?
Well, we already discussed the Apap dragon. That myth is fundamentally dualistic. It is Ra, the solar god of light and order, battling Apap, the monster of darkness and chaos.
Right.
And in another massive Egyptian myth cycle, you have Horus, the young solar god, battling Sut.
Who is Sut?
Sut, who later becomes set in Greek mythology, is the betrayer. But he originally represented the desert, the drought, and the paralyzing thirst. He is the ultimate adversary of the life-giving Nile.
So it's a battle of natural elements again.
Exactly. And if you go even further back into older African folktales, as Massey extensively documents, you have stories of the hare representing the good, upspringing, returning moon, constantly outwitting the Zimwi, which is the evil swallower of light.
So the concept of dualism, of a good force battling a destructive force, was already ancient, deeply embedded, and fully codified in Africa way before Zarathustra was even born.
Exactly. So when Jorjani praises Zarathustra for turning against the traditional gods, which Jorjani retroactively labels as archons, he is celebrating a profound misunderstanding of how mythology actually evolved.
Unpack that mechanism for me. How is it a misunderstanding? What does Jorjani think happened versus what actually happened?
Jorjani frames this Zoroastrian dualism as a political and spiritual rebellion. He thinks Zarathustra was a whistleblower.
Like he uncovered the conspiracy.
Right. He believes Zarathustra realized the creator gods of the physical world were actually evil manipulators keeping humanity in the dark.
Neo waking up in the pod.
Exactly. But the original mythos, the African and Egyptian dualism that Williams and Massey describe, was not a political rebellion against creator gods. It was a cosmological representation.
It was science, basically, their version of it.
Yes. It was the sun battling the dark of the underworld, which the Egyptians called Amenta. It was the rain battling the drought.
It was nature.
It was nature observed and recorded in sign language. The quote-unquote evil power in these early myths wasn't a sadistic spiritual governor trying to trick your soul. It was simply the harsh, natural reality of nightfall or a dry season.
That is such a crucial difference.
It is. So if Zarathustra did invert the religion and declare the old nature gods were literal demons, he wasn't discovering a profound metaphysical truth about a simulated matrix. He was just taking ancient cosmological symbols, ripping them completely out of their natural context, and literalizing them into a paranoid theology.
He wasn't decoding reality. He was just misreading the emoji.
Precisely. That is exactly what happened.
So this brings us to a critical juncture in our audit today. We've torn down a lot of Jorjani's framework. I have to ask, is Jorjani just entirely 100% wrong?
Wow.
Is there any historical validity to his video? Or is he accurately describing what the Gnostics believed, even if the Gnostics themselves were wrong about the history?
That is a very important distinction to make, and if we are conducting a fair audit, we absolutely must acknowledge where he is accurate.
Okay, where is he accurate?
Jorjani brilliantly and vividly reconstructs the Gnostic attitude. The Gnostics of the 2nd century really did believe the material world was a trap run by evil archons.
They really thought that.
They really did. They really did read conventional scriptures, like the story of Moses looking for hidden inverted meanings, where the creator god is actually the villain. If you want to understand the psychological mindset of a late antique Gnostic, Jorjani's description of their worldview is highly evocative and accurate to their texts.
But I hear a but coming.
But where Jorjani is plainly, demonstrably wrong is in his historical attribution. He claims this Gnostic paranoia was Plato's original intent when he wrote the Allegory of the Cave in the 4th century BCE.
Right.
And he claims this represents a profound, literal, metaphysical truth born in Persia with Zarathustra.
When in reality, according to the lenses we use today.
In reality, it is a late, syncretic misreading of Egyptian nature typology. It is a fundamental failure to understand primitive sign language. Jorjani is reading the symptom of the disease of language and calling it the cure.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've gone from the shadows of Plato's cave to the initiation halls of Ionia, down into the Nile Valley to examine the zoo types, through the racialized historiography of the Aryan model, and all the way into the cosmological origins of dualism.
It's been a journey.
It is time to pull all these threads together. Let's issue the final verdict on the video. Let's do a rapid-fire, fair, and exacting summary of our forensic audit.
All right, let's start with where Jorjani is defensible.
Okay, where does his argument hold up?
He correctly identifies that Gnosticism draws heavily on Platonic thought, particularly the epistemological division between the material world and the ideal world.
Yeah.
He also correctly identifies that a massive shift in dualistic thinking occurred in late antiquity, where the material world began to be viewed not just as flawed, but with intense active suspicion.
Fair enough. Now, where's his argument overstated?
His reliance on Persia as the sole origin of Platonic dualism is vastly overstated. By focusing entirely on Zoroastrianism and using biographical anecdotes like Pythagoras studying with the Magi, he operates entirely within the confines of the Aryan model.
Right, he ignores Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
In doing so, he completely ignores the vast order and far more documented Egyptian evidence for the doctrine of opposites and the origin of Platonic ideas as thoroughly explored by James and Bernal.
Okay, and where is he being speculative or relying on rhetorical embellishment?
His framing of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as deliberate, conscious shadow plays designed by literal archons is pure rhetorical speculation.
It's just a leap.
It's a massive leap. Now again, as we said at the very beginning of this deep dive, we maintain a strictly neutral stance on the religions themselves. Our focus is the mechanics of his historical argument. And historically, framing millennia of complex, organic religious development as a deliberate demonic con job is a theological projection.
Right.
It is not a historical fact. It is taking a specific Gnostic belief system and asserting it as an objective mechanism of human history.
Finally, the fatal flaw. Where is the argument plainly wrong?
He is plainly wrong in claiming that Plato's cave is a literal description of archons manipulating humanity.
The guys holding the props are not monsters.
No, they aren't. The cave is an epistemological allegory rooted in the Egyptian mystery system's doctrine of opposites. It is a philosophical exploration of the limitations of human perception in a material body. It is not a sci-fi hostage situation run by cosmic dictators.
This entire audit raises a really profound question, doesn't it? It shows us how we view history and how incredibly easy it is to project our own modern anxieties backward onto ancient texts.
It absolutely does. And this is exactly where our specific lenses prove their worth today. Revisionist frameworks like James and Bernal, despite whatever flaws or overextensions critics might find in their details, genuinely help expose our massive cultural blind spots.
Yeah, they shake up the snow globe.
They do. They force us to see how the Aryan model systematically erased Egypt from the narrative of Western civilization, leaving us with these incomplete timelines that philosophers like Jorjani then try to fill with Persia.
And what about Massey? What is his ultimate value here?
Massey provides the master key to human thought. He teaches us that ancient myth must be understood as sign language, not literal history. When we lose the ability to read the symbols, when we forget that the apap dragon is just a primitive emoji for a drought, we start literalizing metaphors. We start seeing actual monsters in the shadows.
So, to synthesize our audit into a single sentence, Dr. Jorjani isn't clarifying the historical evidence of Plato or antiquity. He is retrofitting a modern, highly politicized, sci-fi-esque Gnostic theory onto it.
Perfectly said.
He is taking the mistranslations of late antiquity and presenting them to his audience as the original hidden matrix.
He is undeniably a very compelling cinematic storyteller. But the actual history, the story of how human beings slowly learned to conceptualize nature, develop philosophy in Africa, and transmit it across the Mediterranean, tells a different, and I would argue, far more fascinating story of human development.
It really is more fascinating. It reminds us that reading ancient philosophy requires us to do the hard work. We have to understand the symbols of the time, the zoo types, the physical environment those people lived in. We can't just project our modern internet age anxieties about being controlled by hidden elites or living in a simulated reality onto the past.
We have to let the ancients speak their own language, rather than forcing them to speak ours.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, we always like to leave you, the listener, with a final thought. Something to mull over that builds on the incredible landscape we've mapped out today, but pushes it just one step further into your own life.
Consider this. We've spent the last hour seeing how the terrifying archons of Gnosticism, these supposed cosmic dictators running a matrix, were originally just ancient African and Egyptian symbols for a lack of rain and the darkness of night.
Just weather.
It was just nature, tragically misunderstood by later generations who forgot how to read the language. So if those ancient, terrifying monsters were just mistranslations, how many of our modern cultural and political monsters, the shadowy, all-powerful conspiracies we fear are controlling our world today, are just misunderstandings of complex, systemic forces we simply haven't properly learned to read yet?
Are we just looking at the weather and assuming someone is chucking heaps of water about? That is a question worth asking yourself the next time you find yourself staring at the shadows on your own wall. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, keep verifying the evidence, and we'll see you next time.
Containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece, and Africa as the birthplace.